You're not real cops." That was the first thing out of my mouth as the pounding on my front door rattled the frame at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. The sound echoed through my hallway, sharp and ugly, way too early for anything good. I could hear the metal latch on the gate outside clattering as the wind pushed it shut again, and the creak it made set my nerves on edge. Two men in dark uniforms stood on my porch. Their voices carried through the wood. "You have 24 hours to vacate the property or face arrest." Arrest? For what? My breath caught in my chest. I'm 65 years old, divorced, and all I wanted was to water my roses in peace, not wake up to some nightmare straight out of a bad crime drama. But this wasn't TV. This was Maple Street, my street. And across the road, I could see her. The HOA president with that smirk I'd come to dread. She stood there in her pressed blazer like it was another business day at the office, except this was my life she was trying to dismantle. Her arms folded, her eyes locked on my front door. She was waiting to watch me break. What she didn't know was that the second I opened that door, her little show was about to collapse. Because wasn't the only one playing games. Have you ever had a neighbor so obsessed with control that it feels like high school drama all over again? At my age, I thought I was done with all that. But let me tell you how this circus started, because the truth is, it didn't begin with fake cops. It began with a piece of paper taped to my door 18 months earlier. Back then, I was still adjusting to the fallout of a 40-year marriage that had ended in court. I'd taken the corner house, the one with the cedar deck I built myself and the small garden that had gotten me through the loneliness of divorce. My son, dropped by most weekends, usually tracking dust onto the porch with his boots, pretending to fix things just so I wouldn't feel alone. Those were the moments that kept me going. Then showed up. The first citation was laughable. Non-compliant window installation. I remember holding that slip of paper in my hand, staring at the permit number she'd written down. PB 202344471, the exact permit from renovations I'd done years earlier. How did she even know that? The city buried those documents in planning archives most people don't even know how to find. That was the first time I felt my stomach drop. She wasn't guessing. She had inside information. Soon it was the cedar deck, then the garden. She wanted a licensed landscape architect to redesign what I'd already planted with my own hands. 800 here, 1,200 there. By the time I added it all up, it was nearly $5,000 in fines, and for a retiree living off a fixed income, that was like a wrecking ball to the chest. Neighbors started acting strange, too. Folks who used to chat with me about the weather suddenly avoided eye contact. Judy, the teacher next door, whispered one evening while we were both pulling weeds, "David, this isn't normal HOA stuff. It feels organized." Her words stuck with me because I'd worked 30 years as an insurance adjuster. I knew patterns when I saw them, and campaign had the cold precision of a fraud case. And it only got darker from there. Sprinkler heads mysteriously broken after my elderly neighbor walked past. Fence posts loosened. Tools moved in the shed like someone had been inside. Each time I told myself maybe it was coincidence, until the day I overheard on the phone. Her voice carried across her driveway, sharp and businesslike. "Need property acquisition completed before final rezoning vote. 6-month timeline is firm." That wasn't neighbor talk, that was business. Which brings me back to that morning, the pounding, the shouting, the fake cops on my porch. Thought she was about to win. That she'd push me into packing my life into cardboard boxes while she prepared to cash in on the land beneath my feet. But what didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. Every citation, every voicemail, every strange, concerned neighbor letter. I had case files stacked higher than the kitchen counter, and I wasn't the only one keeping records. See, my son wasn't just a helpful weekend visitor with dusty boots and a toolbox. No, was something else, something would never have seen coming. And the moment that front door swung open, with watching from across the street, was the moment her perfect little plan shattered in real time. They tried to evict me with paperwork before they sent the fake cops. Think about that for a second. Not bulldozers, not lawyers. Paperwork. Slips of paper folded neatly and taped to my door like little daggers. Knew exactly where to cut. That was the terrifying part. Each violation was so precise, so targeted, it was like she had crawled inside the city archives and memorized my entire renovation history. My Anderson windows, she listed the model number. The electrician who'd rewired my kitchen back in 2019, she wrote his company name on the citation as if she'd hired him herself. It was harassment, sure, but not sloppy harassment. No, this was surgical. I remember one Saturday morning, sunlight barely breaking over the rooftops, when my son stopped by. He dropped his duffel bag on the porch and saw me standing there with another citation in my hand. His boots crunched on the gravel as he came closer. "Dad, you're pale, what's wrong?" I just held the paper out to him. Non-compliant deck installation, mandatory structural assessment, $1,200. He whistled low and shook his head. "That's not random, Dad. Someone's feeding her this." That was when my old instincts kicked in. 30 years of hunting fraud left me with a habit: document everything. I pulled out my phone, started snapping pictures of the citations, every timestamp, every voicemail left. I even bought a binder and labeled it like an insurance case file. If thought she was going to bury me in paper, she'd better be ready to drown in it herself. But the strangest part wasn't the fines, it was the neighbors. I'd lived on Maple Street long enough to know people's quirks, the Hendersons with their little white dog, Mrs. Green who watered her begonias every afternoon at 4, folks who would wave, chat, ask about the weather. That all changed. Overnight it felt like I had the plague. People crossed the street rather than say hello. Conversations ended the second I walked up. And then came the letters. Typed formal, cold, concern for community safety, property value impact assessment, immediate resolution required. Who even talks like that? I laid them out across my dining room table and the pattern hit me. The phrasing was identical, same commas in the wrong places, same awkward legal terms had been throwing around. Judy, the teacher next door, noticed it too. One evening while we were pulling weeds side by side, she leaned close and said, "David, these read like essays my students plagiarize. Same mistakes, same phrasing. Someone wrote them all." Her support meant more than I can say, because by then I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. Then came the small accidents. A sprinkler head broken, a loose fence post. My garden timer mysteriously scrambled. Little things you'd almost shrug off, except they always happened right after my elderly neighbor walked her daily route past my yard. It was too neat, too convenient. Still, I couldn't bring myself to suspect her, which meant someone was using her routine as cover. So I bought cameras, nothing fancy, just enough to watch the edges of my property, and what I caught changed everything. A figure in work clothes, crouching near my irrigation box right after that same walk. Not my sweet old neighbor, someone else using her as camouflage. That was the moment my chest went cold. This wasn't pettiness anymore, it was sabotage. And then the phone call. I was trimming roses in the front yard, sweat dripping down my back, whence voice carried from across her driveway. She didn't see me, didn't know I was close enough to hear, and her words froze me in place. Need property acquisition completed before final rezoning vote. 6-month timeline is firm. Rezoning acquisition, deadlines, that wasn't neighbor drama, that was business. She wasn't trying to fine me into submission. She was trying to buy me out before some clock ran out. And the smile she wore every time she watched me squirm, that wasn't the grin of a bully. That was the grin of someone who thought they'd already won. But if wanted a war, she picked the wrong old man, because I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the only piece of peace I had left in this world. And she had no idea how far I was willing to go. They weren't after my deck, or my garden, or my windows. They were after my land. That realization hit me like a freight train the night I sat hunched over my laptop, scrolling through the city's planning website. My glasses slipped down my nose, the glow of the screen making the kitchen look colder than it was. And there it was, hidden in the dry language of government paperwork. ZR 204156. Rezoning commercial. Final vote scheduled in 6 months. I had to read it 3 times, my heart hammering in my chest. My little corner lot, the one I'd spent my retirement planting tomatoes and patching fences on, wasn't just worth $320,000 anymore. Once that rezoning passed, it would be worth over $4 million. 4.2 million to be exact. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The pieces slid into place like tumblers in a lock. Sudden obsession. The precise citations. The sabotage. The pressure to sell fast. She wasn't fighting me over HOA rules. She was running a business operation, a countdown clock to snatch a multi-million-dollar property before anyone else knew the truth. And she wasn't working alone. I still remember her voice on that overheard phone call. Tom Bradford's getting impatient. That name kept circling in my mind like a vulture. A quick search revealed him easily enough. Development company, commercial acquisitions. The kind of polished headshot you see on glossy brochures. Bradford Properties. And when I dug through the county records, there it was in black and white. Tom Bradford had been snapping up properties in neighborhoods just like mine, right before rezoning announcements. Elegant, simple, ruthless. Pressure the vulnerable, make them believe their property is a burden, swoop in with a lifeline offer, then walk away with millions. I pushed my chair back and paced the kitchen, the old floorboards creaking under my weight. She's trying to steal it, I muttered. She's trying to steal my home. By the time arrived that weekend, I had documents spread across the dining room table like a detective in the middle of a murder case. He set his coffee mug down and whistled at the mess. Dad, what is all this? Patterns, I said. Every letter, every citation, every fake violation. Look, the grammar's identical. Same misplaced apostrophes, same wrong legal terms. She's writing them herself and just having the neighbors sign. Studied the stack, his brow furrowing. This isn't just harassment, this is fraud. That word stuck in the air. Fraud. I'd spent 30 years chasing insurance fraud. Now it was staring at me from my own dining room table. Had made a mistake, she left fingerprints, little ones but enough. The neighbors' letters all used phrases like property value impact assessment and community safety protocols. Not Judy's words, not the Hendersons' words. I photographed everything, time-stamped every page, lined them up in folders. My son helped me build timelines, cross-referencing citations with city documents, with social media posts that all went live at the same time. It was coordinated, professional. But the moment that sealed it for me was when I discovered she'd altered the HOA bylaws. Tucked into a binder at the community center were new enforcement powers that didn't exist in the original documents filed with the county. I held the two side by side, my hands shaking. She'd literally rewritten the rules without a vote, creating fake authority to back up her fake citations. That night, as I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on, I realized wasn't just a bully. She was a criminal. And the worst part, she thought nobody would ever catch her. But she underestimated two things, my instincts and my son. Because wasn't just some kid helping his dad with yard work. He had training, real training, and he was about to turn his entire scheme upside down. Didn't drag me into court, she built her own. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she arranged tables like a judge's bench, a row of folding chairs for the jury, and a podium where she stood as if she were a prosecutor. Neighbors filed in awkwardly, clutching papers they barely understood. And right at the front, she'd placed a big binder labeled HOA Covenant Enforcement. It was theater, cheap theater, but it was working. I sat there with my own folder, hands clenched tight, listening as Poor stumbled his way through a script had clearly written. His voice shook as he read. Property maintenance violations requiring immediate remediation, escalating penalties for noncompliance. He couldn't even look at me. His eyes darted to like a kid begging a teacher for approval. My stomach turned. This man had once waved to me every morning, his old security guard uniform faded but his smile genuine. Now his hands trembled so badly I thought he might drop the paper. I leaned back, letting my old adjuster's brain kick in. Every official document waved around was riddled with errors, wrong municipal codes, outdated ordinance references, even a typo in the county seal. She wasn't just bluffing, she was forging. And she was doing it in front of everyone. Judy sat 2 rows behind me, a notebook open on her lap. She scribbled furiously, her eyes darting up and down as tried to project authority. At one point during a recess, Judy leaned close and whispered, "David, none of this holds water. They're violating their own bylaws, notice requirements, quorum rules. I'm documenting everything." That whisper was like oxygen. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Then Tom Bradford walked in. Expensive suit, polished shoes. He sat in the back row, silent, but every nod he gave carried weight. I could feel the neighbors shifting uncomfortably, wondering why some big-shot businessman cared so much about our little corner HOA. Because he wasn't a bystander, he was the partner. Strutted like she'd already won. "We will be notifying Mr. Mitchell's mortgage company," she declared, "of ongoing violations that may trigger loan review under the property maintenance clause." A gasp rippled through the room. I felt my pulse spike, my chest tighten. That was financial warfare, not HOA business. I glanced at, sitting quietly in the corner. He didn't say a word, didn't show emotion, just watched. But I noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes never left hands as she waved her fraudulent papers. Something about the calm in his face told me more than words could. He wasn't just observing, he was analyzing. The meeting dragged on, growing bolder with every bluff. She even hinted at municipal partnerships, claiming she had connections with the city for joint enforcement. Lies stacked on lies, spoken with the confidence of someone who believed nobody would dare challenge her. When it finally adjourned, shuffled out, avoiding my eyes, stood tall, drinking in her audience like a queen. And Tom Bradford slipped out with a phone pressed to his ear, already moving on to whatever deal came next. But outside, under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, finally cracked. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "David, I need to tell you something." I stopped, watching the man's shoulders sag like he was carrying the weight of the world. "She promised me money," he said. "Property management consulting, steady income. I lost my job 6 months ago. I didn't realize it was this bad. I needed the money." My heart ached for him. He wasn't a villain, he was desperate. But desperation is exactly what preyed on. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, you've still got a choice." He nodded weakly, eyes glassy. And in that moment, I knew the cracks in his empire were starting to show. When I got home that night, I poured us both a drink. He sat at the table, flipping through so-called bylaws, his brow furrowed. Then slowly, he pulled something from his wallet and laid it on the table. "A badge." "Dad," he said quietly, "this isn't just HOA drama anymore. This is criminal, and we're going to handle it like it deserves to be handled." The room went still, my breath caught. All those weekends he'd spent helping me organize evidence, all those systematic notes, they weren't just for me. My son wasn't just my son, he was law enforcement, and had no idea the storm that was about to hit her. Thought she was tightening the noose. But what she didn't know was that every new stunt she pulled was only building the case against her. That night after the courtroom circus at the community center, sat at my kitchen table, his badge catching the faint glow of the lamp. He wasn't dramatic about it. He just looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, I've been documenting this the whole time, not as your son, as a deputy sheriff." For a second, the words didn't register. My boy, the same one who used to come home muddy from Little League, had been running a professional investigation right under my roof. Every photo I snapped, every voicemail I saved, he had been quietly filing under chain of custody. Not just notes in a binder. Evidence. I felt my throat tighten, half relief, half pride. "Oh, why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shrugged, eyes steady. "Because I needed her to show her hand, and she's starting to get sloppy." Sloppy, that was the word. Campaign, so clean and sharp at first, was beginning to fray at the edges. His voice cracking, the forged documents, neighbors whispering their doubts. She was overplaying. "Here's the plan," said, spreading out papers across the table like a chessboard. "We need admissible surveillance. Video, timestamps, chain of custody. If she or anyone she's working with sets foot on your property again, we'll catch it." The next morning, we installed motion-activated cameras with night vision around the perimeter. Not the cheap kind I'd bought before. Real law enforcement grade. moved with quiet precision, running wires, checking angles, dust on his boots as he crouched by the fence. It was like watching a soldier prepare a battlefield. Judy came over later that day, her garden gloves still on. She sat with us on the porch, flipping through her notebook. "I've been documenting every meeting," she said, "and I'll testify if it comes to that. Teachers get trained to recognize patterns of abuse, and that's exactly what's doing." I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening just a little. Support meant everything. For weeks had made me feel like the world was against me. But here, on my porch, with steady presence and Judy's quiet determination, I realized I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Across the street, though, was still plotting. I saw her packing her driveway one evening, phone glued to her ear. Her voice carried just enough for me to catch the words. "Deadline," moving up. "We can't wait." Deadline, the word stabbed me. She was under pressure, and desperate people don't think straight. Showed up the following night, knocking timidly on my door. When I opened it, he looked broken. His shirt was wrinkled, his hands trembling. "David, I can't do this anymore." I led him inside, sat him at the kitchen table. He rubbed his forehead, muttering, "She promised me steady work, money I needed, but now she's talking about cops." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, cops?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's hearing people, costumes, fake badges. She said early morning, maximum impact, to scare you into giving up." The room went dead silent. I heard the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock. Fake cops. Leaned forward, calm but firm. "You just gave us everything we need. You're not the enemy here, but you need to cooperate fully." Nodded, eyes wet. Relief spilling across his face like he'd finally set down a weight he couldn't carry. That night I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the creak of the old house, the occasional bark of a dog down the street, every sound by dread, was escalating. And was right, sloppy criminals make mistakes. Was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Because when her fake cops showed up at dawn, she thought she'd find a scared old man caving under pressure. Instead, she was going to find a deputy sheriff waiting with the law on his side. The pounding came just before sunrise. Boom, boom, boom. It rattled the front door like a battering ram. My heart jumped into my throat as I scrambled out of bed. I knew this was it, the move had warned us about. 6 o'clock sharp, when the sky was still gray and the neighborhood silent. "Police," a voice barked through the wood. "Community violation enforcement, open immediately." I froze halfway down the hall. They sounded official, too official. That deep, chesty authority you only hear in movies, but then I caught it, a stutter in the phrasing. Community violation enforcement. That wasn't police talk, that was language. From the living room window, I could just make out the silhouettes. 2 men in dark uniforms, badges glinting in the porch light, papers in their hands, and behind them, across the street's SUV. She was sitting inside, barely visible, waiting to watch me fold. The gate creaked in the wind. The dog down the block barked once, then went silent. The world felt like it was holding its breath, but didn't know what waited on the other side of that door. Got there first. Calm, steady, uniform pressed, badge gleaming. My son, not just my son anymore, but Deputy Mitchell of the County Sheriff's Department. He pulled the door open in one sharp motion. The 2 fake cops straightened instantly, expecting an old man with shaking hands. Instead, they were staring into the cold, steady eyes of real law enforcement. "County Sheriff's Department," barked. "Step back and identify yourselves." The transformation was instant. Their tough guy postures crumbled, panic flashing across their faces like a switch had been flipped. The taller one fumbled his fake papers. The shorter one's hand twitched toward his belt, then froze. Didn't give them room to breathe. He keyed his radio, voice crisp, professional. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Mitchell. I have 2 individuals impersonating law enforcement at my location, requesting immediate backup." The words cut through the air like a blade. Official, irrefutable, recorded. I stood just behind him, my phone capturing every second. The shaky bravado drained from the imposters as reality sank in. One of them tried to sputter. "We have a warrant." snatched the papers from his hand, scanning with trained precision. Wrong county seal, invalid case numbers, these are fabricated documents. His voice rose just enough for the cameras to hear. You're wearing costume uniforms with expired badge numbers. This is criminal impersonation. The shorter one actually took a step back, eyes darting towards SUV across the street. That's when I saw her face, pale as a ghost behind the windshield. She wasn't smiling anymore. Locked eyes with the men. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, attempted extortion, and conspiracy. He snapped cuffs onto the taller one with practiced speed while the other froze, too stunned to resist. The sound of metal clicking shut was like thunder in the quiet morning. Across the street, SUV door cracked open, then slammed shut again. Her victory show had turned into a front row seat to her own downfall. Neighbors began peeking out of curtains, doors creaking open. Judy stepped out onto her porch, her phone already raised to record. The entire street was waking up to the sight of scheme collapsing in real time. The taller fake cop muttered, "She said it would be easy." His voice was caught perfectly by my phone's microphone, glanced at me then at SUV. He didn't need to say a word, we both knew. The entire neighborhood knew. Had been caught. But the beauty of it was that she wasn't in cuffs yet. Not physically. Not today. No, her punishment was slower. She had to sit there in her car and watch everything she built unravel. Watch her hired actors buckle under real authority. Watch her neighbors realize they'd been pawns in her game. Her smile died on the spot, and I swear in that silence I could almost hear it hit the pavement. Kept his voice steady as he guided the arrested men toward the driveway. Backup is en route. Scene is secure. He looked every bit the professional, while looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. That morning she thought she'd break me. Instead, she broke herself. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for. Relief. Because the war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The sound of sirens rolled down Maple Street minutes later, cutting through the quiet morning. Real cruisers this time, lights bouncing off the houses, engines low and steady. Neighbors who had been watching from behind curtains stepped outside now, whispering to each other, some with phones raised. And across the street, SUV sat frozen. She didn't step out, not a word. Just sat there pale and stiff, watching her whole empire collapse like wet cardboard. Tom Bradford didn't wait around. The moment those sirens grew closer, his shiny black sedan screeched away from the curb. Tires squealed, leaving long, dark streaks on the pavement. The businessman with the perfect smile? Gone. He didn't even glance back at. He left her stranded with the mess they'd built together. Kept the scene under control, calm as stone. He briefed the arriving deputies, handed off the fake warrants, and logged everything for evidence. His voice carried across the yard, steady and professional. Chain of custody established, evidence secured, impersonators detained. Every word was another nail in his coffin. And the neighbors, their faces told the whole story. Confusion at first, then shock, then something like shame. Judy was the first to speak. "She told us you were breaking rules," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That you were a danger to property values. She never said she was trying to steal your home." One by one, others muttered agreement. They'd signed her template letters, repeated her lines, convinced they were protecting the neighborhood. Now they realized they'd been used like pawns in a chess game they never wanted to play. It was, though, who broke the silence for good. He stepped forward, shoulders slumped, eyes red. The man looked like a balloon slowly losing air. "She promised me income," he admitted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Said I'd get steady property management pay if I helped her. I didn't know she was faking documents. I didn't know she'd stoop to this." His voice cracked. "I thought she had real authority. I was wrong." His confession hung in the air like smoke. You could see the neighbors' faces harden as the truth set in. Hadn't just manipulated me. She manipulated all of them. I glanced back at her SUV. She was gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, her face twisted in something between rage and fear. The smug smile that once haunted my mornings was gone for good. Leaned close and spoke low, only to me. "Dad, she's done, she just doesn't know it yet." Later that day, back inside my house, laid out the evidence on the dining room table. He'd been meticulous: photos, timestamps, videos, submission, Judy's notes, the forged bylaws side by side with the originals. He tapped his finger on the stack. This is no longer harassment. This is conspiracy, fraud, impersonation of law enforcement. Prosecutable. I sat across from him, the weight of it sinking in. Months of torment, of doubt, of thinking I was losing my mind, and here it was, organized, neatly, undeniable. My son wasn't just giving me hope. He was giving me justice. Judy came by in the evening carrying a thermos of tea. She set it down on the table and said, "David, I've drafted my witness statement. Every detail from the fake hearing, every note from those letters. If this goes to court, I'll be there." Her voice shook a little, but her eyes were firm. I don't know what it was, the sound of her voice, calm, or the smell of that tea filling the kitchen, but for the first time in months, my home felt like mine again. Not Target, not Bradford's payday. Mine. Out on the street, the tire marks from Tom Bradford's escape still stained the asphalt. They were proof of his panic, proof that the so-called masterminds were nothing more than cowards when faced with real accountability. And she hadn't been arrested yet, not that morning. But her face, pale and hollow as she watched her actors dragged away, told me everything. She knew the game was over. What she didn't know was just how deep the consequences would run, not just for her, but for everyone who stood with her. Because wasn't stopping at Maple Street. He was about to turn her neighborhood empire into a county-wide criminal case. And there would be no running from that. Didn't walk away from that morning. She was carried away by the weight of her own lies. Within days, the county prosecutor's office had everything they needed. Handed over a file so airtight it might as well have been welded shut: video of the fake cops, forged documents, confession, Judy's notes, and every citation had ever taped to my door. It wasn't harassment anymore. It was a criminal enterprise. The charges stacked like bricks, impersonating law enforcement, fraud, conspiracy, extortion. Each one heavier than the last. Tom Bradford wasn't spared either. His name was all over the property records, his emails tied him to scheme, and his panicked getaway didn't exactly scream innocence. He went from polished developer to cornered criminal overnight. The neighbors who had once avoided my gaze now came by in twos and threes, guilt in their voices. "We didn't know, David," they said. "She told us you were the problem." Their words were awkward, stiff, but I could hear the shame under them. They'd signed her letters, repeated her lines, and now they realized they'd been complicit in something far uglier than HOA drama. Judy's testimony became the anchor. She stood firm in front of investigators, describing every procedural violation had staged, every scripted phrase neighbors had been coaxed to repeat. Her training as a teacher, recognizing patterns of abuse, manipulation, gave her voice a credibility that no one could dismiss. Two chose a different path. He didn't run like Tom. He came forward, fully laying bare how he'd preyed on his unemployment, dangling promises of money until he gave in. His voice cracked when he admitted, "I thought I was helping enforce rules. I didn't realize I was helping steal a man's home." For that, prosecutors showed mercy. He got probation, not prison. A second chance to rebuild. Wasn't so lucky. The day she was sentenced, I sat in the back of the courtroom, hands folded at my side in his uniform. Wore none of her usual sharp blazers, no smug smile, just a plain orange jumpsuit and a face hollowed out by defeat. The judge's words echoed through the chamber: 3 years in state prison, maximum penalty for her crimes. Tom Bradford followed with 2 years for conspiracy and fraud. I should have felt triumphant. Maybe part of me did, but mostly I felt something quieter, heavier, like watching a storm finally pass after tearing up the whole valley. Back on Maple Street, the neighborhood changed. The new HOA leadership was transparent, meetings recorded, bylaws corrected. Judy was elected to the board, her first act to pass a rule: no enforcement without independent legal review. Neighbors who once looked at me with suspicion now nodded with respect. Some even apologized outright. And I saw him one morning picking up trash along the roadside as part of his community service. He caught my eye, gave a small nod. Not proud, not ashamed, just rebuilding. And I respected that. The commercial rezoning went through months later. My property really was worth millions, just like had known. But I didn't sell to vultures like her. I worked with developers who respected the neighborhood, who offered jobs and built parks, not just profit. That felt like the best revenge of all, turning her scheme into something that actually benefited the community she tried to destroy. Sometimes at night, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and listen. The gate still creaks in the wind. The streetlights still buzz. But it's quiet now, peaceful, no pounding at the door, no letters taped like daggers. And every now and then, I think about that morning when opened the door in his uniform and the look on those imposters' faces when they realized they'd been caught. Or, pale in her SUV, watching everything slip away. That was the moment the balance shifted. The moment justice stopped being an idea and became something you could see with your own eyes. Here's the thing, people believe power comes from paper, from bluster, from intimidation. But real power, it's quieter, it's in persistence, in documenting every detail, in neighbors who whisper truth when everyone else stays silent, in sons who stand up when fathers are under siege. Because in the end, fake authority always collapses under the weight of the real thing. And that's the story I'll never forget. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.